Thank you to Kevin for helping to organize this, or organizing it, and to all the participants on the panel. I'm Richard Jordan, the chairman of the NGO Committee on the UN and Sports at UN headquarters, with a question for Peter. Both Michael and Jill referred to the 10 million, more or less, informal jobs in recycling in China. However, during the Olympic Games, Hu Jintao very specifically stated that the Chinese government now is becoming a recycling economy. I don't know if that translates into green jobs, but is there a way for the ILO to measure the impact of the Beijing Olympics and Paralympics on the the creation of green jobs? And I will use only the example of Beijing creating in each of the next 10 years 50 kilometers of new subway lines. We can't even get the 2nd Avenue subway built in 35 years. It's still under 2nd Avenue, and it's waiting to be finished. Thank you.
I think the question should be
you want me to answer directly?
Okay, yeah.
Well, thank you for the question. The whole area of recycling is one where this informality and formality are a huge issue. In many countries, and not only in China, recycling or waste management jobs have been employment of last resort. And it's the poorest of the poor who do it under very marginalized conditions. In a host of countries, we're seeing that governments are trying to address that problem. And if you want to move to a circular economy where you can have a closed cycle of material between production and consumption, you basically need a well-performing recycling industry. This scavenging that you have traditionally is simply not doing it. And there's a lot of pollution, in fact, in the process. If you look at some of the, if you Google images on IT waste recycling in China, you see some horrid pictures there of how these jobs are actually quite dirty in the environment where they take place. Recycling is a green idea, but it's a pretty brown and black reality in the communities where much of that still takes place. And I think China is addressing that. They are moving towards much more regulated, much more formalized processes. And in the overview, you see an example quoted from Brazil, where, again, organizing workers in this sector, getting them into cooperatives, associations, whatever organizing framework you want to use, and creating stable and better working conditions for them actually makes the whole thing economically more efficient, and it makes it a much more interesting proposition for workers and for development of the country by extension.
As Peter says, the organizational framework, I think, is really quite critical, because if you do look at, I mean, on the one hand, as you say, in Brazil, you have some examples of worker cooperatives in the recycling sector that has helped to improve the standards and day-to-day realities for the people involved. Whereas much of China, despite the efforts so far, I think still the situation is one where much of the recycling happens in very informal, family-run businesses. There's also a very high involvement of migrant workers. And so what you have is a situation where workers come through, work in one of these establishments for a relatively short amount of time, and as soon as they have an opportunity to move on to a better job, better paying job, or a job that brings with it better working conditions, they will move on. So it is, in that sense, very, very hard to change and organize that sector, because it is so transient. You know, you don't deal with a very stable situation and very stable set of people who are in it, but it's a constantly changing and evolving sector, and that makes it really, really difficult for anybody who is sincere about wanting to improve the situation as well.
I just want to add something quickly. It's also important when we're talking about waste, the policies about where the waste is coming from and where it's going. So, for example, in the United States, we are sending a lot of our IT waste across our borders to other places for then it to be deconstructed and pulled apart and recycled and reused. And then, so we're not advocating for ourselves in this example where, you know, we have a much stronger waste system where we have more formal sector employment, but instead we're shipping our goods to other countries that don't have the formal employment, and so it becomes kind of a more informal or kind of subsistence workers who are going who are doing this work.